All right, today we're diving into a theory that is so wild it connects a lost European civilization, one of America's founding fathers' fashion choices, and yeah, the code behind Bitcoin. It is a story that's been unfolding for 7,000 years, and it all starts with a single, pretty strange question.
I mean, it sounds like the setup to a joke, right? What could possibly be the link between an ancient society in Europe, Ben Franklin, and a decentralized digital currency? Well, according to the theory we're unpacking today, they're not just connected, they are all key players in the same epic, hidden story. A kind of war between two completely opposite mindsets that has been shaping our world for millennia.
So, our story kicks off way back in the Neolithic period. The first piece of this whole puzzle is a really sophisticated, kind of mysterious culture from southeastern Europe, and a deeply, deeply controversial claim about where the world's first alphabet actually came from.
So, who were these people? First off, you gotta forget any images you have of primitive cave dwellers. The Vinc culture was thriving in the Danube River Valley thousands of years before the pyramids in Egypt were even a blueprint. These people built sprawling towns, they created absolutely stunning pottery, and they were some of the world's very first copper smelters. But the most fascinating thing they left behind are thousands of artifacts just covered in these strange, very deliberate symbols.
Okay, and this is where the mystery really kicks into high gear. For decades, mainstream archaeology just wrote these symbols off as, primitive decorations. But then, this controversial linguist, Radovoje Pešić, came along and made a radical claim. He said this wasn't just decoration. It was a true alphabet, the world's first. He argued that a ton of these Vinc signs are practically identical to letters in Paleo-Hebrew, which is the ancient script of the original Bible. Now, look, most academics will tell you this is just a coincidence, but the theory we're exploring, it says this Vinc script is the mother of all Semitic alphabets, and if that's true, it means the very letters of the Torah weren't born in the Middle East, but in the Balkans.
So, what happened to this incredibly advanced culture? Well, around 4500 BC, something catastrophic went down. And according to this theory, it wasn't just the end of the Vinc people. It was a hostile takeover of the human spirit itself, one that would set the stage for the next 6,000 years of history.
This event is at the heart of what's known as the Kurgan hypothesis. Basically, it describes a massive, violent invasion from the steppes of what is now Ukraine and Russia. Just picture it. Warlike, nomadic tribes, masters of the horse, sweeping down into the settled, peaceful lands of what archaeologists call Old Europe. And their arrival didn't just change the map, it completely changed the operating system for an entire continent.
And this was a fundamental, head-on clash of civilizations. On one side, you have the Vinc, settled, artistic, possibly matriarchal people who worshipped earth goddesses. And on the other side, the Kurgan invaders, nomadic, aggressive, and strictly patriarchal warriors who worshipped a sky god of thunder and war. It was a conflict between a culture based on creation and production, and one based entirely on extraction and dominance.
The aftermath was brutal, and it was total. We can actually see in the genetic evidence a massive replacement of male DNA lineages in Europe right around this time. The local men were largely wiped out. The women were absorbed by the invaders. The population was essentially split in two. The ones who were captured became the ancestors of serfs and, ironically, slaves. The word slave actually comes from Slav, the people of this region. But the intellectual class, the priests, the scribes, they fled south and they carried their knowledge with them. The theory suggests this brain drain, this flight of intellectual property, is the spark that suddenly ignited Sumerian civilization down in Mesopotamia.
Now, this Kurgan mindset, this way of thinking based on dominance and extraction, it didn't just vanish with them. According to this theory, it became a kind of spiritual virus, a parasitic ideology that would jump from one empire to the next, all the way up to the present day.
And this empire is a shapeshifter. Its core methods are always the same, extraction. But the mask it wears, the PR, changes with the times. So in Sumer, the mask was divine order. You serve the priest-king to keep the cosmos from falling apart. In Rome, it was the Pax Romana, peace through brutal, bloody conquest. For the British and later the US empires, the mask was liberty. And today, the theory suggests the mask has changed again to empathy or equity, using the language of compassion to demand your submission. The branding is always new, but the product, extraction, never ever changes.
So, how does this virus actually work? Well, it works by keeping the population in a constant, low-level state of fear and anger. When you're stuck in that fight or flight mode, your body literally diverts blood away from the parts of your brain that handle logic, long-term planning, and reason. You become easier to control, easier to herd, and you're cut off from that higher consciousness that might just realize, hey, wait a minute, maybe we don't need these rulers at all.
And the absolute perfect example of this spiritual sickness is the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. I mean, here's a guy who wrote Meditations, one of the most profound spiritual texts in history, all about stoic virtue and inner peace. But what did he do during the day? He was on the frozen Danube frontier, commanding a brutal war machine that was slaughtering Germanic tribes. He was a house completely divided against itself. And this cognitive dissonance, this strain of trying to be a saint while running a predatory empire, that's what ultimately broke him and Rome itself.
But history isn't just this downward spiral of corruption. The theory says that at key moments, a kind of divine intervention happens. A new technology appears, seemingly out of nowhere, that's perfectly designed to bypass the corrupt, centralized system and hand power back to the individual.
And this brings us to one of the most fascinating, just mind-bending parallels in this whole theory. Let's look at the Aramaic language. It just appeared in history, almost perfectly formed. It was a simple 22-letter alphabet that let any common person learn to read and write. It decentralized the Word of God, taking it out of the hands of the temple scribes. And it spread not by force, but because it was just so useful. Now look at Bitcoin. It appears out of nowhere from an anonymous creator, fully formed. It decentralizes value, taking it out of the hands of central bankers. It is a ledger for the common person that spreads not by government mandate, but by sheer utility. You see the pattern? Both are tools designed to bypass a corrupt priesthood.
You know that famous biblical phrase, it was often used to introduce a message that required a deeper, more intuitive understanding. It was code for, this is something the official narrative won't tell you. The theory suggests that both Aramaic and Bitcoin are exactly this kind of message, a message for those who have ears to hear in their respective eras. Okay, so if we are living under some modern version of this empire and a tool like Bitcoin offers a way to bypass it, what's the personal strategy? How does one individual actually defeat such an ancient system? Well, for the answer to that, we turn to our final character, Benjamin Franklin. Franklin just absolutely nailed the diagnosis of the problem. He basically said, look, the external taxes from some king are bad, sure, but the internal taxes we put on ourselves through our own laziness, our own pride, our own foolishness, those are way, way worse. The system's power to exploit you comes from the inside. To starve the beast out there, he said, you have to master the beast in here first.
And Franklin didn't just write about this, he lived it. You have to picture this scene. When he went to Paris in 1776 to get French aid for the American Revolution, he walked into the court of Versailles, the absolute peak of artificiality and imperial rot. Everyone there expected him to play their game, to wear the ridiculous powdered wig, to bow and scrape. And what did he do? He showed up in a simple fur cap and plain clothes. He completely rejected their frame. And the French court, who were spiritually starving in their own gilded cage, they went absolutely nuts for him. He became this powerful symbol of authenticity in a world drowning in lies.
So the strategy, when you boil it all down, isn't to fight the empire on its own terms. It's to refuse to play its artificial games. It is simply to not wear their wig. True power comes from grounding yourself in reality and authenticity, especially when the system around you is completely lost in illusion.
So what does that look like for us today? Well, the financial beaver cap is Bitcoin. It's raw mathematical truth versus the comfortable lies of fiat currency. The cultural beaver cap is focusing on competence and tradition, building real skills, practicing timeless virtues instead of getting lost in fleeting social trends. And the spiritual beaver cap is fostering a direct personal connection to the divine, whatever that means to you, rather than seeking it through corrupt institutions. Ultimately, what Franklin proved in Paris is that real authority doesn't come from a crown or a title. It comes from personal autonomy, from sovereignty. He got everything he wanted from the French, not by begging, but by being so grounded in his own authentic frame that they felt honored just to help him. And that magnetic pull of a free soul, that is the one thing an empire built on slaves and submission can never, ever defeat. Which leaves us with one final, big question to think about. In a world that seems to demand we play more and more artificial games, could it be that the most revolutionary act of all, The one true hack against the system is simply to be unapologetically, authentically, and productively yourself.